What's up, YouTube? Back with another book review. Today we have The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. I think that's his name. The Bitcoin Standard. And in this book, he goes into a lot of things. He talks a lot about money, the purpose of money, what purpose it serves, what problems it solves. And he also talks about global monetary policy. He talks about how the economy works. He talks about different schools of thought with I think it's, and I might say this wrong, it's like Keynesian, Keynesian like economic theory versus like the Australian theory. And the difference between those two are like basically the one that start with a K. They feel like you can the economy grows with debt, and you can like for the and to basically growth depends on debt, and that's how they want to grow the economy. And if you can grow the economy enough, you can outpace the debt that you're accumulating, basically. And the Austrian like Australian school of thought is more so centered around like real productivity and like real things. I don't know. I understand it, but it's kind of hard for me to explain. And that wasn't my goal to explain it. But yeah, he talks about things like that. And he also talks about, and also obviously he talks about Bitcoin, and he talks about some, I guess I'll say some personal things, not personal, but like individual things like that has to do with you individually as it comes to your money, right? And I kind of wrote down some of the big points that I got from the book. So I guess I'll start off with like the money things. So first he talks about how money solves the problem of coincidence of wants, right? So the coincidence of wants, and this is like the problems with like the barter system. It solves the problems of the barter system, which is the coincidence of wants. So the coincidence of wants is, let's say, if we're on the barter system, you have something, I have something that you want, and you have something that I want, right? So the first problem with it being there's three parts to it. The first one being having the things of equal value, right? So let's just say I have this hand sanitizer and you have this roll of paper towels, right? I have this hand sanitizer and you might want it, but the only thing that you have to give is this roll of paper towels, but I might not want that roll of paper towels. So that's the first problem in the coincidence of wants. Like you have to have two things of equal value that people want to trade, right? And then there comes the value of time frames. So let's say, and that's more so have to do with the durability of the goods that you want to trade. So if I have a car, right, and you want the car, and let's say you're a farmer, you have an apple orchard. You could trade me, I don't know, 10,000 apples, right, for that car. But those apples won't last long enough for it to equal the value of the car. The apples will go bad, and you'll still have a car, but I'll be left with some spoiled apples, right? So that's the second part of it. And then the third part of the coincidence of wants is location, mainly being like I might want something that's halfway across the world, or it might be something that's hard to move, like a house. Like I can't physically pick up a house and give it to you, right? So things like that. He says money solves those by being an equal medium of exchange, right? So instead of giving the first example, if I have this hand sanitizer and you want it, you don't have to give me the paper towels. You can just give me some money, because that money will allow me to go exchange it for some other goods that I want. So the money acts as like a measuring stick, right? And it also solves the problem of time frames, because the money will outlast. If I have a car, you don't have to give me the apples. You can give me the money. The money will last just as long as the car. And location, right? So I can hand you money for a house, and then you just the ownership of the house transfers. Or if I want something from this clothes manufacturer in China or whatever, I can send them money, and they can send me, the clothes. Like the money is easily transferable over like time and space. So that's the first thing. And the second thing he talks about is how money has to be a store of value. So you look at money as it takes you time and energy to produce some money, right? Me and you as normal people. It takes some time and energy for us to get money. I have to go to work. I have to provide a service. I have to build a business. I have to do things in order to acquire money. So what that money has to be in return, it has to be a way for me to store that time and energy that I put out into the ether to receive this money, right? If I put in 30 hours a week at Amazon, I get paid 30 hours worth of currency, right? And that has to be able to last at a reasonable rate over time, right? That money has to be a store of that value that I put into it, my time and energy, right? And that's the key difference between money and currency. Currency isn't a store of value, which is the difference between currency and money. Money is a store of value, and currency is not. So from that point of money being a store of value, next he talks about easy money versus hard money, right? And this is why like fiat currencies are considered a good store of value, because they are easy money. So an easy money is essentially something that's easy to create. So if you think about the Federal Reserve, how they can just print US dollars or whatever other country, they can just make whatever their currency is, right? That makes it an easy money. So that's why the currency, like a US dollar, is not a good store of value, because we all know the more you have of something, the less valuable it is. So if there's only $10 when I'm, let's say there's $10 in the ether, and I put in 3 hours of work, and you say, okay, for those 3 hours, I'm gonna give you $3. And at that, it's worth it at that point. But if they can keep making dollars, then it makes the value of my $3 that I have now goes down, which devalues the time and energy that I put into getting that money, right? So, and then you have things like hard money. And hard money would be things that are hard to create, such as gold. That's why we were on the gold standard, because gold was something that's, no matter how many people want it, you can't really increase production by that much, right? And that makes it a good store of value, because you can't flood the market with a lot more gold versus where you can flood the market with a lot more dollars, right? So then, and that's and you measure that with something called the stock to flow ratio. And you want to have a high stock to flow ratio. So gold has a high stock to flow ratio, meaning how much of it is out there is more than the supply of it coming in over a certain period of time. You can just use a year, right? So you can only get so much gold out of the earth. No matter how hard you try, you're only gonna find so much of it, right? It'll increase a little bit, but with that increase that you put in effort and time that you're putting into finding it, that's more time and energy expended. You have to put more resources toward it, so it balances out. Versus with dollars, you don't have to really put more into it. You just print more, so the value of it goes down. So you want a high stock to flow ratio. So if there's 1,000 ounces of gold and 1 ounce of gold comes into circulation every year, that's a good stock to flow ratio. Versus if there's 1,000 ounces of gold and you're putting out 500 more ounces of gold every year, that's not a good stock to flow ratio. That gold that's out there is going to lose its value very quickly, because you're flooding the market with it. Another thing he talks about is, he points out the fact that no fiat currency, and fiat currency just meaning currency distributed by local government, so the U.S. government, the Afghani government, the Chinese government, the Russian government, whatever. No fiat currency has ever come into existence before first being backed by gold. And he says that's the case because you have to give it some inherent value for people to want to hold it in the first place, right? So if I just say, hey, I'm gonna give y'all got to use these rolls of paper towels for whatever, you know what I'm saying? You got to use it. You probably wouldn't want to do that, because you would be like, well, why would I want the paper towels in the first place? If I'm gonna try to distribute these, I have to say it's worth something. So that's why you back a currency by gold, because you can say, hey, you can redeem these things, these paper things or these coins or whatever, you can redeem these for gold, which is what gave it value. That's why we were on the gold standard, right? So so no currency, no fiat currency has ever come into existence without first being backed by gold, which makes sense. And then he talks about how we were removed from the gold standard around the World War One time because we needed to finance wars. So the restriction that being on the gold standard places on a country is like, if we're fighting this war, we have to fund the war, right? With our money. We have to buy guns, we have to pay soldiers, we have to buy food for the soldiers, we have to tanks, equipment, whatever all else goes into war, right? So if the dollar is backed by gold, you only have a certain amount of dollars that you can use to spend on war. And this, so back then, or like throughout history, wars used to be a lot shorter because you actually had to finance them with real sound money. And I'll get into the concept of sound money actually next, right? So you have to finance them with sound money, right? Money that you just can't make out of thin air. So eventually people ran out of money and they couldn't fight anymore, so they had to surrender. But once you remove the currency off the gold standard and you allow the governments to just keep printing money to finance whatever they want to do, now wars are lasting much longer, all right? Wars are lasting much longer because they aren't running out of the resource required to fund these wars. They're not running out of money. That's why wars last so long now. And then sound money. Sound money is just defined as money that's freely chosen by the market, so freely chosen by people, which is another thing throughout history. People have always gravitated towards gold and silver and things like that. And it's in control of the holder, right? So I need to be in control of my gold, of my whatever that thing is. I should be in complete control of it for it to be considered a sound money. Like, we aren't in control of the dollar. The government or the Federal Reserve is in control of the dollar because they can print it, put it in circulation, take it out of circulation as they so please. And it wasn't freely chosen. It was given to us. Nobody really chose the dollar per se, or chose for it to be taken off of the gold standard. And another thing I learned about around that World War One time is that they so to take the dollar off of the gold standard, well, they didn't take it off of that first. What they did was they declared like a national bank holiday or something like that. And what they did was they told everybody that they couldn't come redeem their dollars for gold for like a week or so or something like that. And then when they finally allowed them to start doing it again, they opened the banks back up. They said, hey, instead of $20 an ounce, the gold is going to be $35 an ounce. So you immediately lose purchasing power, right? In that instance. So yeah. Next, I want to say some of the things that stood out. Just talking about self. So he talks about this thing called low time preference, having a low time preference. And a low time preference is simply another way of saying you have another way of describing delayed gratification. Say, I'm going to put off now for the future. And having a low time preference, and this is also a part of that Austrian school of thought about the economy, the way to grow the economy, right? And that's really how the two sides differ in what they believe in, like basically how you grow the economy. So what they're saying is having a low time preference helps the economy or helps everything grow because let's say, and this is an example straight from the book, right? So let's say you have two people. Let's say you have Jerome, and let's say you have Mike, right? So Jerome and Mike both live on an island, and Jerome and Mike both need to go fish to find food for themselves, right? So it takes time and energy to go, get that food, right? Go catch these fish with their hands, right? So a low time preference, meaning you value the future more. Yeah, a low time preference means you value the future more. So so if Jerome has a low time preference and Mike has a high time preference, Jerome would say, okay, I need to establish something else. Okay, let's say for the 8 hours that they both go look for fish, they both can get 8 fish for those 8 hours. So that's one fish an hour, right? So if Jerome has a low time preference, he'll say, okay, instead of going for fishing for 8 hours a day and getting 8 fish, I'll get 4 fish. I'll fish for 4 hours and I'll get 4 fish, right? While Mike is still getting his 8 fish, he's still putting his 8 hours in, right? But with the extra 4 hours that Jerome has, he said, okay, I'm going to build a fishing rod with my extra time. Now, Jerome will have less fish in the near term, but the technology of the fishing rod will allow him to catch more fish more efficiently. So now, instead of catching 8 fish for 8 hours, when he goes out there for 8 hours, he can catch those 8 fish in 4 hours, right? And Mike is still, catching 8 fish in 8 hours. Jerome is catching 8 fish in 4 hours. So now he has the same input in half the time. So now for those extra 4 hours, he can say, okay, I'll build a boat next, right? So now the boat allows him to now go deeper in the water and find new exotic fish, right? So now he's expanding, right? And he brings those back, and you can bring in the part about you selling it to the free market and everything, and that but just for the purpose so having a low time preference helps because you're allowed to produce more, and you can put time and effort into other things, which also expands the economy or expands society, right? So that's the whole thing about having a low time preference. And another thing he talks about is with money is diminishing marginal utility, and that's all he's talking about. There is the more money you have, the less utility that you will have from gaining one more dollar, right? So if I'm living in today's world and I only have $10, an extra $20 will do a whole lot for me, right? If I'm homeless or something. Or I'll just say the more resources you have. Gaining one more extra thing of that resource, or how many, it's going to mean a lot more, and you'll be able to do a lot more with it versus somebody who has $1 million. Like that extra $20 is not going to mean too much to them. So there's that. And okay. So now a couple of things about the global economy that he pointed out. So he was really breaking down global trade and how trade deficits work. He also talks about how trade deficits aren't really like a real thing, because if you think about it, trading is a zero-sum game. If I export something to you, you imported something. If I export $5 worth of something, you imported $5 worth of something. So it's still like it's a zero sum, right? But he talks about how. So you see how I talked about earlier, like if you can just keep printing money, the ability to keep printing money allows you to have control over who needs that money, right? So by printing a lot of money, you're effectively devaluing it, right? You're debasing the currency. So how that plays into trade is that if I have a very strong currency, right? If I have a strong currency, that means the things, and this falls under this thought process falls under that other school of thought for the economy, the one that starts with a K, right? So if I have a very strong currency, then the things that I make domestically, if my currency is strong versus other currencies, so the Japanese yen versus the US dollar, right? So if the yen is strong versus the dollar, that means the things that they make in Japan are going to be more expensive for the US consumer because it takes more dollars to pay for something coming out of Japan, right? Versus the Japanese yen. So let's say a PlayStation from Japan costs 1 Japanese yen, but 1 Japanese yen is worth $100. So it's costing me a lot more as a U.S. consumer to buy that PlayStation because they have a strong currency. And that affects how much Japan can export because people are going to buy less if it costs more, right? That's just simple. That's basic economics. And currently, I guess countries believe the more you can export, because GDP is made up of part of GDP is exports, right? And they believe that growing the exports is the best way to grow the GDP. And what's the best way to grow exports? If you have a strong currency, that means exports go down. That means if you have a weak currency, exports go up, right? So you make the currency, you devalue the currency to make your products and services cheaper, so other countries will buy more of them, increasing your exports, therefore increasing your GDP, right? So he talks about that. So basically, he's saying there's this race to the bottom for these countries to debase their currencies to make them weaker and weaker and weaker, so they can increase their own exports. But if every and that's that leads to this thing I termed it, monetary game theory, where like it makes sense if you're the only one doing it, but if everybody's doing it, then it loses its it don't really serve nobody, right? It's just like you have a higher incentive to cheat when you're doing something. Let's say you're playing a game, you have a higher incentive to cheat if you're the only one cheating. But if everybody's cheating, then what's the point? You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of the thing there. Okay, and another thing he says is that you don't really need to increase the money supply, right? And this falls up under the other school of thought, the Australian one, the Austrian, I can't remember what I think it's Australian. You don't really need to increase the money supply because technology inherently makes things cheaper. So remember the thing with Rome and Mike with the fishing rod, right? So the fishing rod effectively allowed him to do more with less time. So he can charge less for his fish, right? So if he can charge less for his fish, then the fish can get cheaper for everybody because it costs him less of an input to put into it, right? And if Mike is going to sell his fish, obviously he's going to want to charge more because he's doing more work, but he'll have to bring it down to compete. So in a free market, prices should theoretically come down, right? Because technology makes things cheaper. If you think about the cell phone back in the day, cell phones was a new technology. It was very hard to get one. They were very expensive to use. They were big. They were whatever. But now everybody has one, right? Because relatively, the technology has made it cheaper to produce a cell phone for all of these companies. But things are getting more expensive because they keep printing more dollars and bringing the value of your dollars down, making you have to spend more on things like your cell phone, your TV, or whatever, right? So that's everything with, money and the economy and stuff like that I generally got from that. I feel like that are the most important takeaways, right? So now specifically with Bitcoin, he really breaks down in a good way how Bitcoin works and what gives Bitcoin its value, right? So if you remember those properties of money that solve the coincidence of wants, and it's sound, right? So if you think about Bitcoin, Bitcoin is freely chosen by people. It's not forced upon you. The US dollar is forced upon you. They tell you have to pay your rent, your bills, your whatever, your car note, your student loan. They tell you have to use these dollars, right? So it's not freely chosen by you. So Bitcoin is freely chosen. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, right? It's a sound money because you're in control of it, right? Nobody controls Bitcoin. Bitcoin is its own software. It's its own entity. So you have Bitcoin, the coin, then you have the network, which is the blockchain, right? And how it compares to gold. So you remember how I was saying it's harder to get gold than it is to print like a US dollar because you have to go mine for the gold. And that's essentially what mining for a Bitcoin is, right? So to mine Bitcoin, you have to solve these very hard problems on this computer. And for the computer to run, you have to use processing power and energy. Like you have to use real things for your computer to run to solve these. And when you solve them, you get Bitcoin in return, right? That's the value that goes into Bitcoin. So, yeah. And I could get more into like the technicals of it and like how the blockchain works. So how it works is you have all of these nodes, these computers competing to add a block to the blockchain, right? So to add a block to the blockchain, that's what you do. You have to solve these problems. And once you add your block to the blockchain, you get paid in Bitcoin. And what a block in the blockchain is just a bunch of transactions wrapped up into, I think it's like 1 megabyte or something like that. And yeah, and it's a lot more in the book about why the block size is 1 megabyte and what makes it this and that. But what makes the Bitcoin network like so secure is the fact that you have to get consensus from all of these, from the majority of the nodes on the blockchain, and to make a change. And if they don't, then the blockchain will split off. It'll fork, and it'll like whatever change you try to make, it'll become its own thing, but it'll still be the main Bitcoin blockchain, right? And people have incentive to keep the blockchain the way it is because any change that somebody might want to commit might benefit some people more than others. And if you have vested stake in it, all this money you're putting into mining it or whatever, you will want to keep the integrity of that blockchain, right? And he also talks about how trying to steal Bitcoin by like hacking the blockchain or whatever, even if it was to be possible to do it, if you succeeded, you would effectively diminish the value of what you would perceive to get, right? So a lot of people place the value of Bitcoin and the fact that it's so secure, right? And that it's your own thing that you control. So if I were to successfully hack it and steal something off the blockchain, like steal some Bitcoin from somebody, people would then lose faith in the system, right? If people lost faith in the system, they effectively sell all their Bitcoin, making anything I stole less valuable anyway. So I really have no incentive to use it after I complete said act. So yeah, those are the big ideas I got from the book. Like I said, really, really good book. Talks a lot about the history of money, the purpose of money, like the fundamentals of it. It gives you a lot of world history on like economy, how economies work. Like I said, economic schools of thought. Talks a lot about the history of Bitcoin, how Bitcoin works, really gets into the technicals, and it answers some questions people have about it, like, well, what if this, what if that? That's towards like the end of the book. But if you really want to understand money and economics, this is a great book for that. If you really want to understand Bitcoin at its core, what it is, what it does, yeah, this is that. Oh, and another thing that he talks about how what the blockchain accomplishes that the internet doesn't is that the internet isn't really good at sending value. You can send information across the internet, but you can't send value across the internet, right? So if I send you like a song I recorded, I'm not really sending you that song. I'm sending you a copy of it, right? And that's part of like the double spin problem that you have with money. And actually, that's why you can't just email somebody some money. Because when you send an email, you're effectively sending copies of things. That's why you have to have banks and intermediaries there in the financial system to solve that problem for people, to make sure if I say I'm going to send you this money, the money leaves me and goes to you effectively the way it's supposed to. So with the blockchain and like I said, Bitcoin is linked to real world output being the compute power you need to send that money, to mine that Bitcoin, right? And then on the blockchain, once that Bitcoin is in existence, you don't really send it. You just transfer ownership from, that Bitcoin is marked with as belonging to this particular wallet or this particular entity, right? It solves that problem of double spend. Right. So yeah, man, that is everything I got from the Bitcoin Standard. Shout out to Well Squad Chris for this great read. Get my thumbnail. But yeah, man, Bitcoin Standard. Next, I'm currently reading this right here, Blockchain Revolution. So yeah, I'm in the middle of the preface, the preface, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, tune in for the next one, man. Peace.